Hi guys, we're on day 8. So today we're going to be doing our first read of Two Dreamers. So Two Dreamers in the book starts on page 23 in your packet. You should have it right there. So while we're reading today, you want to make sure that you're keeping in mind the main idea and the theme of the short story. So Two Dreamers, read along with me in your text, please. Hector's grandfather, Luis Molina, was born in the small town of Jalapa, but left Mexico to come to the United States when he was in his late 20s. Often, during quiet summer days, he sat in his backyard and remembered his hometown with its clip-clop of horse and donkey hoofs, its cleanliness and dusty twilights, the crickets and the night sky studded with stars. He also remembered his father, a barber who enjoyed listening to his radio, and his mother, who wore flower print dresses and loved card games. But that was many years ago, in the land of childhood. Now he lived in Fresno, on a shady street with quiet homes. He had 5 children, more grandchildren than he had fingers and toes, and was a night watchman at Sun-Maid Raisin. Luis's favorite grandson was Hector, who was like himself, dreamy and quiet. After work, Luis would sleep until noon, shower, and sit down to his comida. Hector, who spent summers with his grandparents, would join grandfather at the table and watch him eat plates of frijoles with guisado de carne smothered in chili. Luis and Hector never said much at the table. It wasn't until his grandfather was finished and sitting in his favorite chair that Hector would begin asking him questions about the world. Questions like, what do Egyptians look like? Is the world really round like a ball? How come we eat chickens and they don't eat us? By the time Hector was 9, it was the grandfather who was asking the questions. He had become interested in real estate, since he heard that by selling a house, his son-in-law had made enough money to buy a brand new car and put a brick fence around his yard. It impressed him that a young man like Genero would buy one house, wait a month or two, sell it, and make enough money to buy a car and build a brick fence. After lunch, the grandfather would beckon his grandson to come sit with him. Ven, Hector, come, I want to talk to you. Quiero hablar contigo. They would sit near the window in silence until the grandfather would sigh and begin questioning his grandson. How much do you think that house is worth? Mucho dinero? No? A lot? Grandfather, you asked me that question yesterday, Hector would say, craning his neck to look at the house. It was the yellow one whose porch light was kept on night and day. Yes, but that was yesterday. Yesterday I had $5 in my pocket, and now I have only 3. Things change, hijo, ¿entiendes? Hector stared at the house a long time before making a wild guess. 30,000? Do you really think so, my boy? His grandfather would go dreamy with hope. If that house was worth 30,000, then his own house, which was better kept and recently painted, would be worth much more. And in Mexico, even $30,000 would buy a lot of houses. It was his hope that after he retired, he and his wife would return to Mexico, to Jalapa, where all the people would look on them with respect. Not one day would pass without the butcher or barber or pharmacist or ambitious children with dollar signs in their eyes waving to El Millonario. One day after lunch, his grandfather told Hector that they were going to see a house. What house? Hector's grandmother, who was wiping the table, scolded. Viejo, estás chiflado, you're crazy. Why do you want to buy a house when you already have one? The old man ignored her and went to the bathroom to splash cologne on his face and comb his hair. Gently prodding Hector in front of him, he left his house to see another house 2 blocks away. Hector and his grandfather stopped in front of a pink house with a for sale sign. The old man took a pencil and little notepad from his shirt pocket and asked Hector to write down the telephone number. The grandfather paced off the length of the house along the sidewalk and noted the cracks in the stucco. Está bonita, no? He asked Hector. I guess so. Claro que está bonita, son. Of course it's pretty. And it's probably not so much money, no crees? I guess, if you think so. How much do you think? I don't know. Sure you do. A ver, dime. 30,000? 30,000? Do you think so? His grandfather ran his hand slowly along the stubble of his jaw. Perhaps he could buy it. Perhaps he could put down $8,000, his life savings, and pay a little each month. He could repaint the house, put up a wrought iron fence, and plant a lemon tree under the front window. He would also put in a redwood tree that would grow tall and dark so people driving on the street would see it and know Luis Salvador Molina lived in that beautiful house. Later, while his grandmother was shopping at Hanoan's supermarket, his grandfather prodded Hector to pick up the phone and call the number. Hector, uncomfortable about talking to a grown up, especially one who sold things, refused to get involved. He went out to the backyard to play fetch with Bon Bon, his grandmother's poodle. His grandfather followed him into the yard and fiddled with his tomato plants. Finally, he walked over to Hector and said, "I'll give you $2." Thinking it was a pretty good deal, Hector left the poodle sitting up on its hind legs and holding a slobbery tennis ball in his mouth. Hector followed his anxious grandfather inside the house. "Son, just ask how much. Es no problema," his grandfather assured him. Hector dialed the number with a clumsy finger. He held his breath as the phone on the other end began to ring. Then there was a click and a voice saying, "Sunny Days Realty." Before the person could ask, "May I help you?" Hector, who felt faint and was having second thoughts about whether the phone call was worth $2, asked, "How much?" "What? How much money?" Hector repeated, cradling the phone nervously in both hands. "Which property are you speaking of?" The lady seemed calm. Her voice was like the voice of his teacher, which scared Hector because she knew all the answers. More answers about the world than his grandfather, who knew a lot. "It's a pink one on Orange Street. Please hold and I'll look up that information." Hector looked at his grandfather, who was combing his hair in the hallway mirror. "She's checking on the house." After a minute, the woman came back. "That address is 643 South Orange, a charming little house, 2 bedrooms, large yard with appliances, and the owners are willing to carry with a substantial down payment. The house also comes with—" But Hector, whose hands clenched tightly around the telephone, interrupted her and asked, "How much?" There was a moment of silence. Then the woman said, 43,000. The owners are anxious and perhaps may settle for less, maybe 41.5. "Wait a minute," he said to the woman. Hector looked up to his grandfather. "She says 43,000. His grandfather groaned and his dream went out like a light bulb. He put his comb in his back pocket. "You said 30,000, son." "I don't know, I was just guessing." "But it's so much. Es demasiado." "Well, I didn't know." "But you go to school and know about things." Hector looked at the telephone in his hand. Why did he have to listen to his grandfather and call a person he didn't even know? He was conscious of his grandfather groaning at his side and of a woman's gnat-like voice coming from the telephone asking, "Would you like to see the house? I can arrange it this afternoon, at 2 perhaps. And please, may I have your name?" Hector placed the receiver to his ear and bluntly said, "It costs too much money." "May I have your name?" "I'm calling for my grandfather." His grandfather put a finger before his mouth and let out a shh. He didn't want to let her know who he was for fear she would call him later and his wife would scold him for pretending to be a big shot like their son-in-law, Gennaro. He took the receiver from Hector and hung up. Hector didn't bother to ask for his $2. He went outside and played fetch with Bon Bon until his grandmother came home, a bulky grocery bag in her arms. He carried it into the house for her and snuck a peek at his grandfather, who was playing solitaire on a TV tray near the window. He didn't seem disturbed. His face was long and cool, and his eyes were no longer filled with the excitement of money. While his grandmother started dinner, Hector slouched on the couch reading a comic book until his grandfather whispered, "Hector, come here." Hector looked over his comic book. His grandfather's eyes once again had that moist wildness of wealth and pink houses. He got up and said loudly, "What do you want, Grandpa?" "Shh," the old man said, pulling him close. "I want you to call and ask how come the stucco has cracks and why so much money." "I don't want to," Hector said, trying to pull away from his grandfather's grip. "Listen, I'll give you something very, very special. It'll be worth a lot of money, son, when you are old. Now it's only worth some money, but later it will be worth mucho dinero." He whistled and waved his hand. "Lots of money, my boy." "I don't know, grandfather. I'm scared." "Yes, but you are going to be a rich man, son. What are you going to give me?" His grandfather rose, pulled his coin purse from his pants pocket, and took $1,000 Confederate bill from a secret fold in his purse. The bill was green, large, and had a picture of a soldier with a long beard. Hector was impressed. He had seen his grandfather's collections of old bottles and photographs, but this was new. He bit his lower lip and said, "Okay." His grandfather tiptoed to the telephone and stretched the cord into the hallway away from the kitchen. "Now you call, and remember to ask how come the cracks, y por qué cuesta tanto? How come it costs so much?" Hector was beginning to sweat. His grandmother was in the next room, and if she caught them trying to be big shot land barons, she would scold both of them. Grandfather would get the worst of it, of course. The bickering would never end between the two. He dialed, waited 2 rings, and heard a man say, "Sunny Days Realty. I want to talk to the woman." "Woman?" the salesman asked. "The lady. I called her a while ago about the pink house." Without another word, he put Hector on hold. Hector looked at his grandfather, who was watching out for his wife. "He put us on hold." The woman clicked. The phone clicked and the woman came on. "May I help you?" "Yeah, I called you about the pink house, remember?" "Yes. Why did you hang up?" "My grandfather hung up, not me." "Well, then, how can I be of help?" Her voice seemed to snap at Hector. "My grandfather wants to know why the house has so many cracks and how come it's so expensive." "What?" "My grandfather said he's seen cracks." Just then the grandmother's insistent voice rang out. "Viejo, ¿dónde andas? I want you to open this bottle." Terror filled their eyes. Grandfather hung up the phone as the woman was asking in that faint gnat of a voice, "What in the world are you talking about?" "Viejo, what are you doing?" Hector wanted to hide inside the hall closet, but knew it was stuffed with coats and the ironing board. Instead, he bent down and pretended to tie his shoe. His grandfather stared at the mirror and began combing his hair. Grandmother came into the hallway with a jar of nopales. She wrinkled her brow and asked, "What are you locos doing?" "Nada," they said in unison. "You two are up to something. Your faces are dirty with shame." She looked at the phone as if it were a thing she had never seen before and asked, "What is this doing here? You calling a girlfriend, viejo?" "No, no, viejita. I don't know how it got here." He shrugged his shoulders and whispered softly to Hector, $4. Then in a loud voice he said, "Do you know, hijo?" Hector was glad to save his grandfather from a scolding that would go on for years. "Oh, I was calling my friend Alfonso about coming over to play." She eyed both of them. "Mentirosos. Es verdad, mi vida." The grandfather said, "It's true. I heard him call his friend. He said, 'Alfonso, come over and play.'" "Yeah, Grandma." They argued, but the grandmother finally let them off the hook. They were glad to open the jar of nopales and delighted to go out at the grandmother's suggestion to mow the lawn before dinner. Hector and his grandfather mowed with gusto, sweating up a dark storm in the folds of their armpits. They even went down on their knees to clip bunches of grass the mower had missed. Hector was reluctant to ask his grandfather for the $4, but as he swept the driveway and sidewalk, he began to think that maybe his grandfather did owe him the money. He did call the lady, he argued with himself, not once but twice. It wasn't his fault the house cost too much money. As they were finishing up, Hector asked, "How about my $4?" His grandfather, who was pushing the mower into the garage, pursed his lips and thought for a moment. "What is money to a young man like you?" he said finally. "You have no needs, do you?" "I want my money." "What money?" "You know what I mean. I'm going to tell Grandma." "Son, I was just kidding." The last thing he wanted was his wife nagging him over dinner. He dug into his coin purse and brought out 8 quarters. "This is only $2," Hector complained. "Yes, but you get the rest when I buy the pink house. You wait, son. You'll be a rich man one of these days. One day it will all be yours." Hector didn't say anything. He was glad to have the money and even gladder that his grandmother didn't scold them. After setting the sprinkler on the lawn, the two hard-working men went in for dinner. All right, so go ahead and write down your main idea statement as well as your theme statement. Some hints from your main idea statement should start with the topic. The topic of this story is Hector and his grandfather. So, what did Hector and his grandfather do? And the theme is what life lesson they learned. So think about a challenge they faced and what they could have learned from that challenge, and that'll be your theme statement. So go ahead and do that. Don't forget to take a picture of it and send it to me via Remind so that I can see evidence of your work. And tomorrow we'll take another look at the story. All right, have a good day. Bye.